Good evening. I'm Ginger Stickle, Executive Director of Greenwich International Film Festival, and we're honored to host this special tribute to Sir Nicholas Winton. As you can see, we need more ordinary people like Nicky, and we're very grateful to Bleecker Street, Avon Theater, and the panelists who are here with us tonight for sharing this important story with our community. Tonight wouldn't be possible without Dr. Rebecca Colin and the and Simon Colin Family Foundation, without Wendy Stapleton and the Stapleton Family Foundation, and without AJC of Westchester Fairfield. GIFF has always been proud to host a Jewish film series since our inception 10 years ago. And we started our first festival by partnering with AJC of Fairfield and Westchester on the premiere of Germans and Jews. So it's fitting that we're working with them again in our 10-year anniversary. At this time, it is my privilege to introduce Myra Clark Siegel, the Regional Director of AJC Westchester Fairfield. She will be moderating a powerful panel discussion with family and friends of Nicholas Winton. Meyer currently oversees all of AJC's regional activities and represents the organization across diplomatic, civic, and interfaith and intergroup settings in Westchester, upstate New York, and throughout Connecticut. She is a seasoned public policy and communications professional with 30 years of public affairs experience spanning several countries. She is widely sought after as an expert speaker on Israel and anti-Semitism, and we're thankful to have her here with us tonight.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Myra Clark Siegel, and I want to thank Ginger and GIFF and the Avon Theater and to everyone who made this evening possible. We are delighted and honored to partner again with GIFF on this film. I will tell you that I remember seeing many years ago that clip that now has gone viral on YouTube millions and millions of times. And never in my imagination could I have anticipated that we would be together this evening celebrating a light unto... Music is appropriate. Celebrating a light unto the nations, Sir Nicholas Winton. Because when you save one life, you do indeed save the world, and that is what he did. So we are grateful to be together in this conversation this evening, and I just wish that the film came with a disclaimer or a warning not to wear mascara before you see it. This is my second time seeing this film, and I'm still a mess. I'm honored to introduce this evening our panelists, Stephen Watson, Tim Masters, Tamara Meyer, and Melissa Hacker. And I'd like to invite you all to the stage to begin our conversation. The other note that I want to make is that I think this film needs to be required viewing for every student at every grade in every school across this country, because this is a story that we need to hear. So you all have our panelists' bios, and I want to make sure that we use our time as efficiently as possible to hear everybody's stories. I know that with each of you, I could actually speak one-on-one with each of you and be together in conversation for an hour with each of you this evening. So I am just deeply honored on behalf of everybody who is here to have this conversation with you. The first question I'd like to ask is to each of our panelists. If you can each please say your name so everybody meets you, and if you can each tell us when you first encountered this extraordinary story And as a follow-up question, what was important to you that be shared in the film? So I'm going to start with Tamara.
So I first encountered this story when my mom told me how she escaped Germany on the Kindertransport. And while she was not on a Winton Kindertransport, she was from Germany. It was the first I'd ever heard of this. And I was so taken with this extraordinary heroism that her parents exhibited by sending her away to a foreign country, not knowing if they'd ever see her again. In fact, she never saw her father again. And her resilience, this 13-year-old girl going off on her own to, away from her family. I was so affected by that story. So that's when I first heard about the Kindertransport story. And I think in terms of what, the question again.
What you would have wanted to make sure was told in this film.
I think the most important story that is told in this film is the fact that, Wendy and Ginger and Meyer, you've also mentioned this, that one person can make such a difference. And we did a panel like this here in Washington, D.C., back in Washington, D.C., where I live, a few nights ago, and a woman said, I don't know what to do. I want to do something. I'm so inspired by this film. And I think the message is that opportunities present themselves. There's always something that each of us can do to make a difference. And we have no idea how those small and maybe not so small things that we do will ripple forward. Now 6,000 people are alive because of what Nicholas Winton did. Thank you.
Melissa?
Hi, I'm Melissa Hacker, and I grew up with a mother who I knew had been sent away by her parents from Vienna. And I grew up knowing she was different from other mothers, and I didn't know any more than that. It wasn't until I was in college and I thought I would make a portrait film of my mother because I knew she was different and our relationship was different, that she started talking to me, and I asked questions, and I discovered that she wasn't the only child sent alone from Vienna in 1939, that she was one of nearly 10,000 children who were sent on the Kindertransport. And I just want to tell a little story about that photograph. When I made a film, I thought it would be a 20-minute student film. 7 years later, it was a feature documentary. And I spent weeks at the National Archives doing research. And I found this footage, and it had been shot for a universal newsreel of children leaving Prague airport by plane. And it was when you could look and see, like in library file drawers, cards about the film. And I saw a note from the cameraman who was so affected by this sight of seeing the children sent away that he demanded that the pilot call him when they landed safely in London. And the pilot did. And I always thought that was a photograph, that was an image of a father putting his child on the plane. And I was invited to show a work in progress at a reunion of Kinder in Jerusalem. And I used a piece of that footage. And Nicky's wife, Greta, came up to me afterwards and said, Melissa, that's Nicky, you know. And I had no idea. And I was the first person who ever used that footage. I know, because I had to pay to make what's called a safety master. But since that time, many of the children in that footage have actually been identified. And you can also watch that. It's on the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum's archival footage, and you can watch it online. It's an amazing scene in January. And yeah, as to the message, I think it's just so important. The Kindertransports is a story both of trauma and tragedy, of parents and children separated, and also of a light in the darkest times, that people took action and saved lives. So I think it's really important to remember that.
Tim. Thank you, Melissa.
My name is Tim Masters, from the Washington, D.C. area. And I first became aware of this story because my mother and her two sisters were among the 669 children saved by Nicholas Winton. They came from a small village in Czechoslovakia, Tristina, which is about 300 miles from Prague. And it wasn't, I say it wasn't a shtetl, it was kind of a progressive place, but it was very remote. And they had never been on a train, even. So on June 26, 1939, they left and made the journey to Prague. And I think they were on the July 1st train, which was one of the last. I think it was number 6. And as you heard, number 9 did not make it. Number 8 was the last one that made it. But it was one of the larger Kindertransports at that time. Of course, I didn't know, none of us knew really about Nicholas Winton until That's Life, right? And once we knew, it opened sort of a whole new world for all of us. I was also with my parents in 1970. We went to Vienna, where my father was from, and then we drove to Tristina. And it was just me and my parents. My sisters weren't along for the ride, but that was the first time she'd ever been back to her village. And believe it or not, there was actually one person there that she knew. And at that time, the house where she was born, her grandfather's house, was still standing. And we walked through it and collected bottles. It was kind of vacant. And we went to her house, her childhood home. And she went up and knocked on the door. And a little girl came. This was during the Russian occupation. There were 5 families living in that home. And a little girl came to the door and said, called off to her father, "It's Alice Eberstarkova." My mother was stunned. She didn't know how this person knew who she was. The photo album of the family was in the attic. So anyway, that's my connection to this. And my mother and her sister, one of her sisters, became very close with Nicholas Winton. When they would travel to the UK, they would visit with him in that house, in the house in Maidenhead. When he came to the States, he would come to their house, and they enjoyed seeing each other and going out, and there's correspondence between the two of them. And it was a very close relationship up until, he passed away. I think he was close with a lot of the kids, And then in 2009, I had the pleasure of accompanying my mother and one of my cousins and my aunt, one of my aunts, on the 2009 Winton train, which commemorated the 70th anniversary.
And I want you to hold that because we're going to dive into that.
Okay, I just want to add one thing, if I could. You said the thing about this film that I think is important. I think that it dispels some of the myths. I think Nicky Winton would have loved this because for many years there was a myth, about the scrapbook being found by his wife in the attic, and kind of that he had no interest in seeing the story told, when in fact this tells the actual story, I think. So I think that is perhaps one of the most important messages.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim. And Stephen.
Well, thank you. So I'm Stephen Watson. I'm also representing the Sir Nicholas Winton Memorial Trust. And one of the things that the Trust does is look after the artifacts, the awards and documents of Nicholas Winton. And you notice I'm wearing a badge that you might have seen in the film. It's something that Barbara discovered quite accidentally in the little box. The only one of its kind. Nicky didn't remember it, but there it is. That is the Czech refugee children's badge. So I first met Nicholas Winton probably in 1986. Barbara had been a friend of mine for quite a long time prior to that, and I did have some understanding of the story. The children knew about the rescue. They knew that their father had rescued some children in 1939. And so I did get to know the story, but certainly I met Nicholas Winton about 86. And in 1988, Barbara and I were married, and our first child came along. And that was the year, of course, of the discovery and the revelation of the story. So we then spent the next few years looking after our young children. But following that, we would accompany Nicky on many of his trips into Prague to see the Kinder and to receive the awards from the Czech Premier. And it was quite an extraordinary time. And yes, the Winton train was a most extraordinary reenactment of that journey. So I think in terms of what I would take away from the film is that Nicky saw a need. He saw that something needed to be done, and he went ahead and did it. And I think that was his sort of modus operandi, that he would see something, he would see a need, he would fulfill that requirement without any messing about. And I think, to me, he had a kind of clarity of vision just to set his goal and to go for that goal without letting anything get in the way. And he did have a little bit of a reputation. You'll see that they show the poor newspaper man in Maidenhead he throws away. Well, I think that's possibly a little bit unfair to the local newspaper. But he did have a little bit of a reputation, I think, with the local council for making a bit of a name for himself, making trouble, because he then went on to a lot of charitable work and went on to help the elderly people in his area and also MenCap. So it was a long life, 106 years, and a pretty full life. And the number of stories and the documents and the extent of his activities is quite extraordinary, really. But that high point, a short time, a few months in 1939, then gave rise to the whole story. And it gave rise to this extraordinary sort of act of communication with those lost people. We had the list. Nicky had the list. He had the scrapbook. And he thought that what would be of interest would be his work after the war in looking after the finances. He had the job of turning the wealth, if you like, the money, the silver, the gold that had been stolen. He had the job of translating that into hard currency. And he thought that would be of interest. And what we didn't realise was the importance of the list. We knew the list was there, but we hadn't made that emotional connection to all those people. And so therefore, when that was brought to light, it gave this incredible intensity to the story and its incredible reaction, and kind of shocked Nicky, really, because I don't think he sort of expected that was what was going to happen. He was at the programme to check the facts, which is, of course, why Barbara wrote the book, to get the facts right. And I sat next to Barbara while she wrote that book, and it was a sort of response to getting the story, getting the truth out, and stop it. We don't want to stop the mythology, because it's a great, fantastic story, and there is this kind of hero notion going on. But we wanted to. It's very important to get the facts out, and the same with the artifacts. So the Winton Trust holds those artifacts, and objects do matter because they tell the story. You can't deny that the existence of that story. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. One of the questions that I wanted to ask all of you, because each of us carries stories with us. We're taught from the youngest age to lean forward, to listen to the stories that our parents share with us. Is there one particular story that you have learned in your research, in your storytelling, and hearing from your family members that you would like to share with everybody this evening? One, which is so difficult, I know. We'll start with you, Stephen.
That's a little story. I have got with me a little document, which is the first time that this has really come to light, because I go through Barbara's book, so I can just read this little. There's just a couple of little insights here into the way that Nicky his mindset, if you like, and a couple of little ones. And the first one I read, very short one, comes. Yeah, sorry. Okay, this comes from 2010. So at that point, Nicky's 100 years old, and he's literally had people knocking on his door asking him to tell the story. And remember, he was a man of action, and he says, people are always talking about the past, but the fact is, the past doesn't mean anything to me now. So he was a man of the present. And at that point, he'd just wanted to emphasize that things need to be sorted right here and now, which is a story that I guess we all know. And the other one that came to light is an interview with Václav Havel, again from 2011. So again, Nicky, just coming up for 100 years old, he's seen the world, if you like, and he's interviewing with Havel, and they talk really. Gustav Havel, Václav Havel, his family was an architect. His family were architects. I didn't know that. It took a while to translate this. But so Havel says his job now has changed from architecture to human rights. And Nicky says, you agree that religions should work together in common in ethics, goodness, kindness, and empathy. And Václav Havel responds, yes, but also consider metaphysics, he says, and the forming of ethics and behavior. So it's a simple message. It may be a story, and certainly the rescue of the children required a lot of complex organization and putting all those pictures together and finding the homes. But the message is simple, just care and compassion. And he says it right here.
Thank you for sharing that with us. We're honored to be the holders of this information and to take it forward. So thank you.
It is most peculiar because more and more stuff comes to light and more kinder come to light. I had emails from 2 weeks ago. I had emails from a child who was rescued who's living in Paris, and another one in the United States, not far from here in actual fact. So people still continue to appear, believe it or not. Yeah.
And Melissa, if you can share a story with us that you might have learned as second generation.
Oh, sorry. Since this is close enough to New York that many people used to read the New York Times when it was in print, I can tell this story. I remember when I was, I think, around 13, and Helen Epstein's book, Children of the Holocaust, was excerpted in the Sunday New York Times magazine. And it was the first writing about the second generation. And I remember reading this in the magazine and running across the apartment and showing it to my mother and saying, look, there are other families like ours. We're not the only ones. Because one of the things that I learned much later, that my mother had friends who we knew were her Viennese friends. But years later, after they had both died, I was talking to her friend's son, and he said his father had been on a Kindertransport, and my mother had been on a Kindertransport. And we both knew that even though they were friends for 40 years, they never talked about it because the Kindertransport children had such guilt that they were the lucky ones, that nothing really happened to them. And of course, so much happened to them, so much that shouldn't happen to any child, so many things that they saw. And it's taken a really long time to get the story of Kindertransports to be a little bit more well known. And my mic, there we go. And sort of to have the Kindertransport children be accepted as Holocaust survivors in their own way.
And that trauma goes from generation to
generation. And it's not something that's in the past. We've had children separated from parents at the southern border of the U.S. not too long ago. We have to learn from these things.
Tamara, a story to share also as a second generation survivor.
Yeah, it is really difficult, Myra. Thank you. There's so many. Melissa made me think about a conference I helped plan in Washington for Kindertransport survivors. And I had in the back of my mind that maybe I'd be able to get my parents to come, because my parents had never really talked about their backgrounds. My parents are both Holocaust survivors. And I think one of the things you just brought up, Myra, is that everybody has a story, and everyone's relatives have stories. And I just want to encourage everyone to ask your relatives to tell their stories. In my case, my parents really didn't want to speak, but I started this campaign to get them to come to the conference, and they did. And they met, like Melissa was saying, they met so many people like themselves who were Holocaust survivors, who were Kindertransport survivors like my mother. My father escaped in another way. And after that, I couldn't get them to stop talking. It was like, from then on, all I heard, they never asked me, how are things going? There were more and more and more stories. There was more that they wanted to share. And it wasn't all, of course, there was a lot of sadness, a lot of trauma that was hidden, amidst a lot of what they shared. But it was important for me to hear it because it had always been there. It's just that it hadn't really been spoken. It was an unspoken history that I was aware of in a certain sense, but had never really heard voiced. So it was just really, again, I think there's something remarkable when people get together and they speak about their truths, whatever those truths are. They speak about their backgrounds, whatever those backgrounds are. I'm all about dialogue. And it's an extraordinary, especially, in these times when there's a lot of divisiveness, it's amazing when people come together and just speak. And I think that's one of the gifts my parents gave me. Thank you.
I'm going to add a plea to your request to have our families tell their stories, and that's to video record them. Not just have them tell their story, but record them, share them, and post them. Share them with Yad Vashem. Share them with the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. Share them with your community. Bring your friends together, because the Holocaust survivors are dying, and we have very, very few left. And this memory, through the book, this extraordinary book, this extraordinary movie, each person's story is a story that other people's stories are not told. We don't have those survivors. We have 6 million people who were murdered, and their stories were not told. So we need to tell these stories. So Tim, I'm going to ask you to share also a story.
Well, I would say, in addition to what you said, you can also share it with the Shoah Foundation, which
Absolutely.
collects
Forgive
histories.
me for not saying that.
That's okay.
Absolutely.
I think my parents both had stories, and they shared them with that and with the Holocaust Museum and a number of other things. I would actually, there are a lot of stories, it's hard to pick one. But I would share one that my sister gave me. And by the way, I want to add that Tamara mentioned the screening in Washington the other night. My mother is still with us. She is, on May 10th, she'll turn 99. And she came to that screening because it was 15 minutes from where she now lives. So she is still with us. But I wanted to share the story that my sister in Los Angeles tells. She's a journalist, and when Nicky, we found out about Nicky, and he came to the United States, he was invited for dinner at my parents' home. And our father, knowing my sister was a journalist, wanted her to interrogate Nicky about his role in the Kindertransports. Now, this was relatively soon after the story became known. And at that point, he clearly didn't want to talk about it, possibly for two reasons, and this is my sister talking. One, because he lost a train full of kids, and that guilt stayed with him, as you could see in the film. And two, because he thought he was getting too much credit when the others on the ground in Prague played huge roles and never got the recognition because they had died. She goes on to say that he would appreciate one life because of the, again, sort of telling the new story that we now know. Eventually, she says, he came to accept that people needed him as a hero. And when she interviewed him for NPR years later after that dinner, he was resigned and quoted a Latin saying, which basically translates to, if it's not true, it makes a damn good story. And then there's one other thing, if I can share really quickly. It's like 2 seconds. These are the things, we'll get to that, but that my mom used to take when she would speak at high schools and middle schools and things like that. And I was just looking through it the other day, and some of the things I'd seen before, but some I had not. And I discovered all this correspondence that she saved from Nicholas Winton, all the letters that they wrote back and forth. And in 2003, I guess my parents had written a letter to him congratulating him on the knighthood. And he wrote this letter back, 16th of March, 2003. Dear Peter and Alice, thank you for your kind thoughts. While I am greatly honored with the recognition of Bachelor of Knighthood, I remain the same, Nicky. And I think that kind of sums it up.
Extraordinary.
Just to add a little one to that. Probably about the same period, we had a letter from the University of Sheffield in England offering Nicky an honorary degree at Sheffield University. And we all in the family and sitting in the kitchen, we kind of looked at each other and we went, nah. And Nicky went, nah. And that was it. So he never got his honorary degree. He wasn't interested.
So Tamara and Melissa, as children of Kindertransport survivors, of course, of German Jews and of Austrian Jews, you're both educators about the lessons of the Holocaust and talking about its stories as an antidote for hate and the opportunity for dialogue and education. Yet AJC's recent State of Anti-Semitism report in America, the largest of its kind, shows that American Jews feel deeply unsafe as Jews at this point in time, deeply fearful, and at record levels. How do we deal with the rise of anti-Semitism, and what is your message? And I'm going to also extend this to Stephen and Tim as well.
So I also, like Stephen, I represent a group, the Kindertransport Association, which is a nonprofit founded by Kindertransport survivors 30-something years ago. And it's an intergenerational group that reunites and connects survivors and the next generations, educates about the Kindertransport story as part of Holocaust history, and supports and advocates for children at risk, especially child refugees without parents today. So, of course, this is a huge question. And as you mentioned, the sort of elephant in the room is that we're losing the first generation. And it's always been thought that one-on-one meetings can create empathy and understanding. And so we're starting to train members of the second generation and the third generation to tell their parents' stories. There's also a great organization, 3GNY, which has 3G Philly and 3G Miami, which is the third generation who are really active in education. And I had a thought that just left. But,
So how do we talk about anti-Semitism and the fear, and how do we educate others?
So I think one of the things is with the Kindertransport, we have been trying to use that as to say, look, we grew up for the first generation, we grew up in this. We saw words become actions, hatred first expressed in speech and then expressed in action. So recognizing patterns of rising fascism and rising hatred and stand out against it as it develops. And also, it's really important to develop relationships cross-culturally and develop allyship and try, I think, to stand not just for ourselves and to stand for others, to build community. And always education, building community, trying to learn, to change the course of the future for the better. It's what so many of the kinder, a big part of their life was giving back, because they were children who were rescued, and they've been active in various ways throughout their lives, charitably, politically, educationally, and we carry that legacy. And the big challenge also is to, I think, to act on that legacy with love and not out of guilt and obligation.
Thank you. Beautifully stated. I'm going to actually go down the row this way then. So Tim, if you can talk about, how do we make sure that we are making people feel safe and secure, and helping each other see each other not as the other, but as fellow human beings on that same message?
Well, that's a very big question. I don't know how I can top that, and I'm not going to try. I think that I think if we tell these stories, if we can draw it back to the film and the survivors, obviously there are so many stories, and I think that if we keep sharing those, I mean, there's a lot of love, in the story, and resilience. And I think that those are messages that are important. And if we, what they say about if you don't teach about the past, you're bound to repeat it. So I think that we just have to keep the message going.
Thank you. Tamara?
That's such a great question. I don't know that I have the best answer, but I'll say that before my dad died, I promised him two things. I promised him that I'd take care of my mom. I'd make sure everything was okay with her, for her. And, God willing, I've been continuing to do that. She's doing great. She and Alice are good friends, or they haven't seen each other for a while, but she's also almost 99 years old. And I also told him I would do what I could to address anti-Semitism. And I have been involved with an organization called Parents for Peace that helps people leave radicalized organizations. We help people leave neo-Nazi organizations, ISIS, etc. And one of my colleagues, who I've gotten to know over the last 12 years, and I have been traveling around the country doing programs on anti-Semitism. We call it Dismantling Anti-Semitism. And on October 9th, the week after, I guess it was October, it was the following week. We were supposed to be doing a program at a university in New Jersey. I'm not going to mention the university at the moment, but the dean, whom I love, called us and said he needed to speak with both of us. And he said, look, I've got to ask you to change the name of your program from Dismantling Anti-Semitism to Dismantling Hate. And I said, sure, no problem, that's fine. And my colleague, Arno Michaelis, who's a former neo-Nazi, said, no. If there was ever a time to talk about anti-Semitism and call it what it is, this is it. I'm not willing to do that. So we talked about it, and the dean said, who happens to be Jewish, said, listen, I can't guarantee your safety if we call it that. And I already am going to have to change the way I'm structuring this. I can't invite the public. It's not safe to do that. I'm thinking about your safety, my safety, the students' safety. We talked about it at length, and my colleague finally agreed, and we all agreed to change it to, Dismantling Hate. So this was a really upsetting experience for me, for all of us, because we realized something had really shifted, something had really changed in the United States. And I'm a speaker on a podcast that a friend of mine named Daryl Davis does called I think it's called Beyond Barriers. I can't think of the name of it right now. And he asked me about, he's a black man who's helped a lot of people leave white supremacy. He's an amazing man. Daryl Davis, look him up. He asked me about anti-Semitism, what my experiences of anti-Semitism were. And I said, no, I really haven't had any. And he was really upset with me afterwards. He said, why did you say that? How could you say that? I said, well, when I think about what my parents experienced, I can't possibly claim to have experienced anti-Semitism. And he said, look, I'm a black man. I haven't experienced anything like what my parents experienced, but I can definitely say I've experienced racism. I said, well, you can redo the podcast and I can restate it, but I felt it was not appropriate for me to really claim that, because in another sense, I was also taught to never tell people I'm Jewish. It's not okay to tell people you're Jewish. It's not safe to tell people you're Jewish. So according to my black friend, I've been, quote unquote, passing. And now I'm going all over the United States and a little bit outside of the United States and talking about being Jewish, talking about dismantling anti-Semitism with a former neo-Nazi. Things have changed a lot for me. I don't have an answer. I'm not sure what to do. The question we always get asked is, why do people hate Jews? I always get asked that, whether it's little kids or adults. And I don't have a ready answer. I mean, anti-Semitism is considered the oldest hatred. It goes back at least 3,000 years. We don't have ready answers. The one thing that I do talk about, and that my colleague, my former neo-Nazi colleague and I model, is dialogue. We are very close friends, and we work together to dismantle hate and anti-Semitism. And I would just recommend talking with people. It's, I'll mention one other thing. We were doing a talk in Indianapolis at a book festival there. And I met a woman who brings groups of Jewish kids into schools all over the state. And they just talk about being Jewish. And I thought that was brilliant. It was just, I think when people talk together, they find out that there's so much more that they have in common than not. So sorry for the long answer.
It's true. And I think, to paraphrase Dara Horn's book, people love dead Jews. And I say that because your point is so critically important. It is not only to teach about the Holocaust, about the Shoah, but we have to make sure that people know contemporary Jews, because that is what breaks down misperceptions and barriers. And we have found in the AJC survey that nearly 1 in 2 Americans, nearly 1 out of every 2 Americans, has personally experienced anti-Semitism in the past year alone. So our job that you all are describing is critical. And if we thought that it was a simmering flame, it is now a 5-alarm fire that it is up to all of society to put up. Stephen.
Yes, I just say a few words. Barbara Winton had a friend called Philippe Sands, who was an international human rights lawyer. And his book, East Street, West Street, brought to light the works of a lawyer called Lauterpacht from Lvov in what we now call Ukraine. And he set forward the international agreements for human rights. And it's the right of the individual, respect for the individual, that's absolutely paramount in all situations. If the individual is given the correct rights, these other issues will fall away. And I was just reminded of one of the script writers, Lucinda. There was Nick and Lucinda were the script writers of the film. And Nick Drake had connections with Czechoslovakia. His parents were from Czechoslovakia. But Lucinda said it was a particular week when a child was washed up dead on one of the Greek island shores, Alan Kurdi. And she saw the pictures of that child, and she said she was so moved, she went off immediately and volunteered and did some work for refugees. But when the script for One Life arrived, she said, I had absolutely no choice, but I had to do that script and put that message out.
And you yourself are an educator with planetariums. You've educated about 150,000 children, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
So you continue that legacy of education?
I've sort of had to step up to the plate because I was Barbara's bag man. I could sort of wander along, carry the bags, carry the books, sort of sit in the back row, take it easy and watch her while she did her talks and the educational work that she was involved with. And really, I've had to step up now and take that on. So I have been doing my best to fulfill that huge gap that Barbara's left behind her, but she has certainly left this fantastic legacy of the film and the book.
And it seems to me that you carry that theme forward to teach children to dream, which is what you're doing, and that's part of what I think that Sir Nicholas did, was to dream of what was possible and to say the impossible was merely a step on the way to what was possible.
I guess that's so, yes. He was a wonderful man in many ways. He was a very contented individual. Although he was driven, when he had his relaxation moments, he certainly knew how to relax. He was a great gardener, and you'd find him wandering around in his garden in his wellies and his clippers and lighting bonfires all over the place. And a great opera lover. There's nothing he would like more than to sit with some Puccini and the hi-fi up very loud. You know, you want it nice and loud, don't you, when the opera comes on. And certainly in his youth, they did seat hopping. So they would start off in the gods at the back of the theatre, and then as the lights went out and seats became vacant, they would hop towards the front. So, and that, of course, we're going back a long way. You know, we're talking, 100 years ago, aren't we, almost, something like that. So, yeah.
So, Tim, you brought some very special artifacts with you in addition to what Stephen shared with us, which is so extraordinary. Can you share a little bit with us about what you brought?
Sure. Well, first of all, let me hold this up. It's kind of small, but the young one in the middle is my mother, and this one is her older sister, Yoji. This is Alice, and this is the youngest one, Ellie. And when they came to Prague and were, loading them onto the train, my grandmother kept taking Ellie off the train and putting her back on, and taking her off and putting her back on. And I think the two sisters would say, keep her, like don't have her, keep her. And ultimately, almost literally, as the train was pulling away, she went back on the train. So, as I mentioned, my mother used to carry these things when she would speak at schools, and I think that's also important that, thank you. Tamara was saying we're all sort of carrying on the stories, right? My mom used to speak at schools until a few years ago. This was a blanket when they went to the station in Prague. Her father, my grandfather, bought blankets for all three girls, and my mother saved hers. So this is her blanket. I have to open this one up. Hold on a second. And it's remarkable that we still have these, I think. For the journey, and again, my mother and her sisters had never really left Tristina and had never been on a train even. My grandmother made this dress for my mother, who was 14, had just turned 14 at the time. So this is one thing that she saved, obviously. And she hand embroidered every bit of this nightgown. And my mother obviously treasured these and saved them for all these years. So those are two things. And then this other thing I have is not really related to my mother, except this is, I think Stephen may recognize this. This Nicholas Winton, for his leisure, would do, what do you call this, needlepoint? Needlepoint. And this is a square that Nicholas Winton made. There you go. Oh, one other thing. In this picture, on the clip of That's Life that you've all probably seen on YouTube, in the actual clip where they all stand up and he turns around, my mother's sisters, Yoji and Ellie, are standing immediately behind him. They lived in London, so my mother wasn't there for that reveal, but they were, and you can see them in that clip on YouTube.
I don't know how to follow that. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Sure.
Thank you. So I know we want to get to audience questions, but I'm going to ask perhaps a final question of each of you. Because the issues that we've seen in the movie could be one of grave despair. We experienced that in Sir Winton's own emotions that he shared or kept in and very rarely shared. But we also had glimmers of hope. So I'm going to ask each of you, I'm going to start with you, Stephen, if I may. At this time, what gives you hope?
I think we do, we certainly live in an age of communication, and that is both good and bad. But it does mean that things happen, things whiz around the world very, very rapidly. And I think that the right messages can move fast as well as the crazy messages. And truth tends to be more singular. In other words, you can have an infinite number of crazy ideas, an infinite number of mad ideas, and an infinite number of untruths. But simple facts, simple emotions, care, compassion, humility, those are simple emotions, I suppose. And if we broadcast those messages in the ways that we have today, then I think that there is possibility of hope for the future. But we must make our voices heard, because the opposition, shall we say, tends to shout, whereas the people who are perhaps a little more caring tend to be a little bit too quiet. So I guess we have to raise our voices, perhaps.
Thank you. Tamara, what gives you hope?
I love your question. I love that question. And I think that right now I feel a real mission to keep hope alive, both within myself and elsewhere. And it gives me hope to be here speaking about this amazing film, this amazing man who I only met one time, who inspired, he's inspired so many people to do so much. And I'm also really inspired, I think, by my mom, who's just so extraordinarily resilient and witty. And she gives me hope. And I think also just the fact that my colleague and I have been doing this work of talking about dismantling hate, dismantling anti-Semitism. I feel like right now I have to do something. I don't know if it's the right thing to do. I don't know if it's the best thing to do, but I have to do something, and I'm trying to do my little part to do good. And I think each of us can do that. And keep talking. We have to keep talking. We have to have dialogue.
Thank you. And by the way, for both of your mothers, until 120. Tim.
Well, this will be the shortest answer of the night. Hope, obviously, sometimes is really hard, especially now. But this film gives me hope. And the fact that the screening tonight was sold out gives me hope. So I'm going to leave it at that.
Melissa.
I think both the third generation is doing really great work and really looking at their grandparents' past and how to use that legacy to really affect the present day and the future in a positive way, and really picking things up in a different way than we would have done as a second generation. And that gives me hope. And also the resilience and the commitment to action of the kinder I know. My friend Ann Kellerman from Vienna, who is 99, who is still talking to students. Ilza, they're just Manny Corman, who's spoken twice after this film to sold-out screenings in Long Island. Their dedication and their life force, and after what they've been through, is inspiring. And we're here. We have no choice. We have to do what we can. So that gives me hope from time to time.
Thank you all. I'm going to see if we have time for any audience questions. And before, as we're doing that, if you can please raise your hand if you have a question, and we ask that you please say your name briefly and ask your question briefly. But I just want to share that Sir Nicholas's motto, which is so extraordinary, and on the basis of that question, has really stuck with me so much, which is, if something is not impossible, then there must be a way to do it. And perhaps that is the best path that we can take forward and message that we can take forward. So we have a question here, please, and if you can.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I just wondered, is the briefcase still somewhere?
Is the briefcase still in existence?
I think we have to allow the filmmakers a bit of artistic license here.
Oh, okay. And I also want to know, how did Nicholas meet his wife, and was she aware of what he had done previous to that? We talk about documents. We do have a written piece of evidence from the 1950s when Nicky put himself forward to be a local councillor on behalf of the Labour Party. And within his little bio that he wrote, it says, I was involved in the rescue of 600 children in 1939. So we do have a little bit of documentation. But Greta was an activist in her own right. She was active against the Germans in Denmark. She was Danish. And I think that the idea that Greta didn't know what Nicky had done is a little far-fetched. Yes, the scrapbook may have been put away briefly in the attic. In Mattier's first film, he shows this cobwebby attic, which is a bit like the place I live in, the great big oak beamy place. But actually, the attic at New Ditton, where they lived, was about 3 feet high. And so if things had been put in there, you certainly couldn't walk around and discover them. I recall the scrap was on the top landing. So the family knew. I think it's fair enough to say that. And I did know of the rescue in something like 1979. So surely she did know.
Were any of your parents in contact with their families that they saved?
I'd like to speak to that very much so. So even though I didn't know my parents' history, I did know about my mom's foster family. And I thought everybody had a foster family. I thought everybody's mother had a foster family. And every November, my mom would go shopping for things to send to her foster family for Christmas. And every December, we get this huge box of presents to put under our Christmas tree from all the foster family. And I still remember the presents we got. We got some amazing things from some of my mom's foster brothers and sisters and her foster mother and some of her other friends in England. So we really maintained that kind of relationship. And then we ended up having some visitations from different members of the foster family. And then I ended up going to England to visit this foster family when I was 19. And it was just an eye-opener for me because I had no idea. I just never really understood the extraordinary love that these people had for my mother, and suddenly it was being showered on me. And I recognized how important my mom had been to this family, and vice versa. And this has continued. I'm now an honorary Botham, and my mom's foster brother's son came over from England a few years ago for her 95th birthday, I think, and also to interview her about the family because he's trying to get some information about his family. So it's a great question. But I know that that's the case for a lot of other kinder that they've, in fact, we've even had kinder who've brought some of their foster family to these conferences that we have. So really good question.
And my mother's sisters, both of them, were sponsored by a very well-known classical pianist named Meyer Hess. And she sponsored, I think, hundreds. I think my sister said 1,000 the other night, but I can't imagine it's that many. But several hundred children at 50 pounds per sponsorship. And if you look it up, 50 pounds in 1939 in $24 is something like $5,000 per kid. My mother was sponsored by a single woman named Fanny Bendit. So there were no foster brothers or sisters or anything like that. And yes, we knew her. And whenever we would go to England, my mother stayed in touch with her forever until she passed away. And whenever we would go to England, we would go and have tea or lunch or something with Fanny Bendit. And she was, she was a part of our extended family, really.
And I just want to add also, I mean, this is an odd coincidence, I do want to say, that my mother, she was first in 8 different foster families because she was crying and nobody wanted her, so they kept turning her back to the committee. But she finally found one that loved her and she loved them, and they had a daughter her age, she was 12, and a little brother who was 6. And then if you know about that time in England, the children were evacuated from the cities. And so they were then evacuated and they wouldn't separate from each other. So they were with someone who they called the witch, who gave their meat rations to her Scottish Terrier, which gave my mother a lifelong hatred of Scottish Terriers. But we were friendly. I was just emailing with Morris, the little brother's daughter, a few weeks ago. This is something that when the Kindertransports were first looked at, which is years after concentration camp survivors, they looked just at the children and nobody thought to look at what about the parents who, your foot.
Yeah, there we go.
What about the parents who sent their children away? What happened to them and what were their feelings? And it's only now that there's a researcher who's looking into the foster families. Who were they? Why did they take children? And it was a range. It seems we're all people whose parent had a good experience. Some were taken in and abused. Some were taken in as servants. Some were taken in to be a companion to a child. Some were in hostels. Since we're in a movie theater, I'll say the family of the director, John Schlesinger, who made Midnight Cowboy, his parents set up a hostel for 12 children from Berlin. And they were always close with the Schlesinger family till now. Some were on farms. There's a well-known Mill Isle farm in Northern Ireland, and Grick Castle in Wales that had 300 children. But it was a range of experiences, and the concern was to the children, if they didn't have particular sponsors, they were sent to these summer camps that were unheated in the coldest winter in 50 years and so on. But committees from all over the country would come and look at them and say, okay, I'll take one of those to Nottingham and I'll take this one to London and this one here and this one there. And they really wanted to get them out because they couldn't bring more children until there were spaces in the holiday camps. So it was an amazing operation that happened very quickly, as you saw in this film. And some things worked out and some did not. So, a range of experiences which we're still learning about.
So I know that the time is late. Do we have time for one last question?
So of the children from Sir Winton's Kindertransport, how many were reunited with their parents after the Shoah, after World War II? Do you have any idea? You speak about the foster families, but did some of those families actually stay as the families because the parents didn't return?
So this is something I think any of us can only answer anecdotally, because really there haven't been those kind of studies of the Kindertransport children, and you have things with people's names changing. I mean, it's amazing. With the Winton children, you can do more research because you have that list of 669 children. With the 10,000, it's much harder. But I think the general feeling is that more than 50% of the children never saw their parents again. The majority of them stayed in the UK. And remember, it was also not only England, but Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales took in children as well. And then they tended, if they had any relatives at all in America, they would come to America. Many went to Palestine, Israel, and some went to South America. Their parents had gotten out through South America and they met them there. Some went to Australia. So it's really, they're scattered all over the world. I spent a beautiful few days with a kin in Nepal. So, yeah.
I can only speak for my family, and one question I've gotten repeatedly is, how did they know about it? They were in Tristana, again, tiny little village, 300 miles from Prague. Well, my mother and her sisters, their mother, my grandmother, had a brother who was living in London. He heard about the Kindertransport and told the sister, you have to get them on. You have to get them on this Kindertransport. And that's how they found out about it. My mother and her two sisters were able to come to England from Czechoslovakia and survived and thrived. The uncle was already in Great Britain. There was maybe one cousin who survived from Czechoslovakia. Everybody else perished.
I'm just going to mention, I've had a Kindertransport scholar living with me this winter from Great Britain, and she has 3 books coming out about the Kindertransport. She's been spending hours and hours and hours in the Holocaust Museum archives far, far away from my house and everything else. And she's really gathering research to answer that exact question, as well as a lot of others. As Melissa was saying, there's so much that we're still discovering, we're still learning a lot. This was a very fast-moving, messy, sometimes chaotic operation, and a lot of information was lost. A lot of kids were kind of lost. It wasn't always a rosy picture. That said, approximately 15,000 children altogether were saved on these Kindertransports throughout the world, about 10,000 to the UK. And not all of those children survived, but many of them did. And as Melissa was saying, many of them never saw their parents again. In my own case, my mom was reunited with her mom and her sister, not her father. So there are various stories. Great question.
And Stephen, we're going to give you the last word for the evening. And thank you for coming in from the UK, specifically for this program this evening.
It was a pleasure. Okay, well, thank you for a wonderful response. And it's a wonderful film and a wonderful legacy. And we just hope that the message, that's a simple message of care and love, gets sent around the world. So thank you very much.
tell your friends to go see One Life.